We are recording.
Hello, my name is J. Daniel Sawyer, and I have a hat problem. I also have a writing addiction and a reading addiction, and I read and write a lot of books. Joining me is my friend.
I am J.R. Murdoch. Thank you so much for joining us. I also have a reading, writing, and a hat problem. I have written many novels. You can find more about me at jrmurdoch.com. You can find out more about my friend at jdanielsawyer.net.
jdsawyer.net.
JD, I was really close. I was really close that
So
time.
close.
Almost. We should cut and start over. No, we shouldn't.
Now, let's keep it going and keep it real.
Dan, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about one of the great innovators in the field of genre fiction. His name is Robert A. Heinlein, and he invented young adult science fiction,
Who?
as well as many other subgenres.
Who?
Robert A. Heinlein, also known as the Dean of Science Fiction. I wrote the book on his young adult fiction because I was... Oh, yeah, you've got it right there, don't you?
Hold on. I got a copy of it right here.
That's right. It's called The Secrets of the Heinlein Juvenile by J. Daniel Sawyer. And that came out of the fact that I encountered Heinlein on the day he died. My father was a huge fan, and I'd never heard of him. And I caught my father was not a demonstrative man crying on the front porch of the house. And I asked him what was wrong, and he said, Heinlein died. And I said, who? And he looked at me like I was from Mars. And he stood up and he wiped his eyes and he took me by the arm and he took me out to the garage and pointed at the top shelf at a box. And he said, climb up there and get that box. I got it down. It was full of books, old paperbacks. He rifled through it. He pulled out a book called Tunnel in the Sky, and he handed it to me, and he said, read this and come back for the rest of them. And Tunnel in the Sky is like the anti-Lord of the Flies. It's about a bunch of school students who get trapped on an alien planet during a survival test, and so they have to band together and form a civilization, and they do. It was enchanting and wonderful and like nothing I'd ever read before. And so I went back and I read the rest of them. And my whole life I've been looking for other books that are like that, and I've only found the occasional one. There's some really interesting, distinct flavor about them, and I was convinced it wasn't just Heinlein's voice, because although I love the rest of his fiction, none of it feels like his young adult fiction. He was doing something specific. So back in 2009, a friend of mine, Gail Carriger, wrote a book, and it was a Heinlein Juvenile. And she was not a Heinlein fan. I didn't know how she did it, but I was reading it. I'm like, this is a Heinlein Juvenile. It has to see the light of day. She wrote steampunk. Her publisher didn't want it because it was science fiction. So I bought the rights and kickstarted an audiobook for it. And in the process, I started studying the Heinlein Juveniles to figure out what Heinlein did that made this a unique form of fiction. It's not just the first YA science fiction. It's actually its own literary tradition. And I figured out how it was put together. And I wrote the book on the subject in order to give other authors, many of whom grew up on Heinlein's Juveniles and never figured out how to write that kind of story, so that other writers could write it. And I also write those kinds of stories. My first Heinlein Juvenile was a book called Hadrian's Flight. It's out on the market. The next one is called The Wolf of Venus, which I'm currently serializing at venuswolf.substack.com. And then in August or so, it'll become available in the general marketplace.
Now, Heinlein was not my gateway drug to sci-fi.
Well, he wasn't mine either. It was
oddly, I got a book here.
Oh.
I had to track it down because I checked it out from the library, and the librarian said, are you sure? Because I was not a brilliant reader. I was, let's just say it, I was learning challenged as a kid. And
yeah, me
I
too.
got Mere Friend, Mere Foe by George Takei.
Wow. I didn't know he ever wrote a book.
This was my introduction to sci-fi. Oh, and after I read this
with Robert Aspirin?
With Robert Aspirin, yes. Sorry, let me.
Nice.
And after I got done reading it, the librarian who said, are you sure? I got done and I turned it back in and she said, did you like the book? And I'm like, I loved it. she handed me Starship Troopers.
Oh, wow.
That librarian, and I wish I had a memory like some people. I got a memory for books. I remember books like crazy. Um, but I can't remember that librarian's name, but she gave me Starship Troopers and I devoured that one next.
Mm-hmm.
And that led me on a path to, okay, sci-fi is what I want to read.
Yep.
Yes, I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, but sci-fi was really the gateway drug for me. And it was,
Yep.
yes, this was a good book, but it was a one-off. And I
Mm-hmm.
discovered Robert Aspirin much later.
Yep.
I didn't even remember Robert Aspirin contributed to that book. I just remember George Takei, and my dad saw the book and he's like, "Isn't that the guy from Star Trek?" And come
Yep.
to find out many years later, yes, if you look at the cover, that's actually the way he posed on one
In
of
the
the Star
Naked
Trek
Now, right?
episodes.
Or in the
Yep,
Naked Time. Yeah.
yep. Was it the Naked Time or the Naked Now?
The Naked Now was the TNG episode. Naked
Oh,
Time
okay,
was the
yeah.
original. But
But
yeah, no, Star Trek was my gate. Star Wars and Star Trek were my gateway drug into sci-fi. But the first science fiction book I ever read was A Wrinkle in Time.
ooh, Ursula K. Le Guin, right?
Yep. No, Madeline L'Engle.
Oh, Madame Langle.
Yep.
Ursula
Read that
was
when I was 6 years old and loved it.
wow. Yeah, I was an early teen before I really discovered I could read. I had a severe learning disability where reading just didn't work for me.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm very dyslexic, but it shows up mostly with numbers. Though I actually, now that I do audiobooks, I actually read out loud faster than I read silently.
I'm currently reading one of my books out loud to myself, and it's interesting how few times I need to go back and re-record something.
Isn't that amazing?
And I just did an episode this evening, and I not to get too much into learning disabilities, but I think I had 6 edits in the entire thing, and I
Yep.
just started getting back and recording. I just recorded chapter 17. I mean, I'm 17
Yep.
chapters into a book, and I've done a dozen other audiobooks before, audiobooks.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's not like this should be all new to me, but the fact that I can go back and have that few edits is amazing. But we were
Yep.
talking about Heinlein.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, we
Yes.
segued to us, but that's going to happen from time to time. We're writers. We got a problem.
That's right.
So you were talking about
So
the I guess the formula, you would say.
yeah. So what makes these special is that they're built from 3 kind of modern literary traditions and 2 ancient ones. The Western world has 2 basic literary traditions. It has the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. The hero's journey we all know from Star Wars. It's about a character who hears a call to adventure. He refuses it, and then something forces him onto the adventure anyway. And along the way, he makes alliances with people who help him out, but then they eventually fall away, and he has to face the ultimate challenge on his own. Often will die and then get resurrected because he loses, and then in his resurrected form, either literally or metaphorically, he goes and he faces the final challenge again and he wins. And the cost of the victory is that he has to grow up. And so when he goes home, he doesn't fit. He has to make a new place for himself in society or go off and wander the world because the person he was when he left home was a child, either literally or metaphorically. And then he's coming back as a full grown adult, having been initiated and come into his own. So it's a tale of growing up and of conquest and winning the prize.
And
The
Aragon,
heroine's journey.
yeah,
Huh?
Aragon, the dragon book by Christopher Paolini, I believe it was,
Yep.
is very much follows the formula of a hero's journey to a T.
Yep. Yeah, and most of the ancient myths do. Samson, Hercules, the whole bit. The heroine's journey is like that, but it's inverted, and it's the feminine form. So instead of the heroine being called to adventure, her home is shattered, and so rather than going out to seek her fortune, she goes on her quest to restore her home. And along the way, she makes alliances with people. But instead of facing the final test alone as a result of what they've taught her, she faces the final test as part of an ensemble, and it's the social network that she's created that allows her to prevail and restore her home and go back and maintain civilization. At a very basic primal level, the hero's journey is about the creation of civilization, and the heroine's journey is about the healing and maintenance of civilization.
That makes a lot of all of those Hallmark movies make so much more sense.
They're all heroine's journeys, as is
Yeah.
most modern romance. And um, if you look at Lord of the Rings, Frodo goes on a hero's journey, and Sam goes on a heroine's journey. And that's why that series is so satisfying, and so satisfying across genders as well.
I never thought about it that way. That's fascinating.
So those are the ancient traditions. And then the modern traditions, you have the Horatio Alger formula. Horatio Alger wrote young adult books in the late 19th century, and he wrote them because he was a gay man who cared very much about virtuous living. And he was really, really annoyed that there was no one else who was gay who could have mentored him as a child and showed him how to be both a good man and a gay man. And so the Horatio Alger formula has it's come down to us as the by his bootstraps story, but it's not that at all. It's the Pygmalion story. It's a young disadvantaged boy who is virtuous but kind of useless. Does something virtuous in the sight of a wealthy person who then takes pity on him and sort of brings him into high society and trains him how to be conversant in the ways of the respectable people.
Okay.
And as the result of that, he then takes his place in civilization. The next of the modern traditions is the Bildungsroman, which is what we would now call a coming of age story. It's a different kind of coming of age story than the hero's journey, because where the hero's conflict is external, it's with enemies that he must conquer, or the heroine, it's with the enemies that have destroyed her home. In the Bildungsroman, the conflict is internal. It's with the hero's own faults. And the hero of the Bildungsroman's job is to find a way to develop his character so that he can fit the square peg of his identity into the round hole that society has available for him, without actually losing his identity.
Right. Okay.
So it's a journey of maturation rather than necessarily of initiation.
Right. It's an internal struggle versus an external battle.
Right. And then finally, there was the Stratemeyer formula, which was innovated by Edward Stratemeyer, who, ironically, was the guy who Horatio Alger picked to finish his last story when he died.
Oh,
And he
interesting.
liked it so much, and he was a big fan and a friend of Thomas Edison. He looked at what Thomas Edison was doing with his invention factory, and he said, I could do that with kids' books. And he brought a bunch of authors together and wrote out this formula for high adventure, high action, high sensationalism stories that we know as the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and Tom Swift and the Bobbsey twins and
Very
the
formulaic.
Boxcar Children. And the thing that he really brought to children's literature was what was then called sensationalism, which is a focus on the immediate sense experience of the characters and on thrilling the reader with danger and daring do and bad guys coming at you every way and all that kind of thing. Heinlein melded these all together into a really distinctive form, and it's got a couple interesting features that he pioneered himself. The first is that in addition to working all these formulas simultaneously, which is a hell of a trick because they don't naturally fit together, he also always included one element that was ripped from the headlines. In one book, in Have Spacesuit Will Travel, the ripped from the headlines element was alien abductions and the discovery of Pluto. He then always included one sort of general story type. So in Have Spacesuit Will Travel again, the general story type was the oh god, I can't remember which. I have to pull my book out. Um, anyway, some of the general story types were like The Boy and His Dog, or The Hidden Prince, or The Western, or those kinds. Oh, it was Pirates. It was Treasure Island.
Ah, okay.
What was in Have Space That Will Travel. And then he always ended the book not at the end of the story, but in chapter 1 of book 2. And that is the ultimate secret ingredient, because the experience of being a teenager is you finally figure something out and then something else that's beyond you jumps out at you. So it's not, there's no happily ever after, there's only leveling up. And so the last chapter in every one of the Heinlein Juveniles focuses not on the adventure that just happened, but on what the hero has qualified to, what kind of trouble the hero has qualified to get into next.
Yep, you climb them stairs.
Yep.
It's
And
never a straight line. It's always incremental.
and there's a few other important thematic elements, but that's really how the Heinlein Juvenile works, is those elements all together.
Yep, I know. I think Farmer in the Sky was the second one that I discovered of the Heinlein Juveniles,
that
and
was
I never read them all in a sequence. And you aren't the first person to tell me you didn't read them in order. I'm
I
like,
didn't read them in order the first time either.
no, and when he told me that, I'm like, I don't think I've even read them all. So that's something that I know. Before I really dip into your book, I did want to go through and read them all in the order they were intended, and
Yep.
then
Well,
read
I
your
mean,
book.
they're not connected in a story fashion,
Right.
and they were intended just to be standalones. But if you read them in order, what you get to see is you get to see how Heinlein discovers the formula and develops it, and what
Yep.
he every book he takes what he did before and he said, okay, well, let me try this other thing and see if it works. And it's not book 3 that you really get the fully fledged Heinlein Juvenile, which was Red Planet. The first one was Rocket Ship Galileo, and the second was Space Cadet. And Red Planet is where the whole formula gels together. And after that, he knows what he's doing, and you can see him just cutting loose and playing with every subsequent volume.
Yep. I definitely have a lot of reading to do, and I think I have all the books downstairs. A friend of mine sent them to me, going, "Here, you need to read them."
Yep.
Ship
And
me a
they're
box of all.
gloriously short. They read in an afternoon, even for someone like me who doesn't read fast.
Yeah, they're nice. If I remember right, they're all nice thin little books,
Yep,
like
about like that.
100 to 150 pages at most.
Yeah, about 150 pages each of them.
Yep. And as we started at the beginning, I've overcome my reading disability, my learning disability. I discovered that speed reading, I actually read faster and read better than trying to slowly read and understand each word. My brain processes words differently. That everyone reads differently.
Yep.
But that's an exploration that I definitely want to take, and a journey I want to take. If you're a viewer, a listener, whatever, if you have read the Heinlein Juveniles, if you've explored this, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Drop us an email. I'm jay@ofgnomesandwarves.com.
I'm Dan at jdsawyer.net.
Yep,
and tell us what your favorite one is, what you'd like to hear us talk about, and then as Jay reads them, we can talk about each book.
Yep. That's kind of the plan. Hey, that's what we're doing here. We read books, we talk about books, we write more books. One of these times we'll actually have to hold up some of our books and share some of our covers and what we've done.
That's right.
A lot of my stuff is considered in the YA vein, but I don't consider them such because of the fact that the main characters aren't all YA characters. YA, it's all dependent on the age of the main character to peg that YA thing. But my books are considered minivan safe. I don't have sex, drugs, and rock and roll in my books. Rock and roll, yes, but sex and drugs, not so much, and swearing, very light dashes of it here and there.
Yeah, with my books, it depends very much on the book. Some of them have a lot of bad language. Some of them have a lot of violence. Some have a lot of sex. Some have a lot of darkness. And some of them are really, really light and suitable for everybody.
Yep. Suave Rob is one of those.
Well, Suave Rob does have a lot of bad language.
Well, but
because
it's
he's
still,
a surfer, right? Yeah.
yeah, it's
I had so much. There was
he's a surfer.
in the second book. There's a bit where he's doing community service for bar brawling, and he's giving a safety lecture to a bunch of junior hires, and he gets in trouble with the resource officer for swearing, and not because he said anything that we would consider a swear word, but because, as he says those all the time, but he uses the word plonk, which in this universe is like the worst swear word.
Oh my. Oh, at any rate, Dan, it's been great talking to you. Great getting caught up.
Likewise.
We will do this again next time.
Can't wait.
Might have a different hat on next time. I don't know. We shall tell. But Dan, it's been absolutely wonderful.
Jay?
Viewers, listeners, all, thank you so much for joining us. We'll do this again next time.
See ya.